Another regular season is in the books. And before we start to talk about and, yes, make our predictions as to which teams will move on in the OHL playoffs, we have a champion amongst us. Dan Mahar, talk about your big weekend for your hockey club. Let's go.
All right. Well, thanks. Yeah, I have to give a shout out to my U16 Hurricanes who won the KMHA year-end title for U16 house. And yeah, it was exciting. 5-0 in the tournament, overtime in the finals. But they were the best part is these kids were a great group of kids. Just one of those rooms where everyone gets along, everyone respects each other, everyone plays as a team, and they did it the old-fashioned way. So
Hard work.
hard work, teamwork, not on the backs of one or two kids, on the backs of all of them. So I think it was special for those kids for sure.
Second coming of Dale Hunter over here, undefeated all the way to the championship. Congrats to you and the entire U16 house team in Kitchener Minor Hockey. Way to go.
Thank you. And shout out to our opponent in the final two, a gentleman you might know coaching them, Mr. Michael Lannon, class act, was coaching the other team. Great, gave us a great battle, great season for them as well. So.
I will give a shout out to Michael Lannon anytime. He is indeed a class individual. As we move into this stage of our podcast season, Dan, I can't help but wonder if we've lost four markets. Are Sarnia and Guelph and Ottawa and Peterborough still listening, do you think? I don't know.
If you're an OHL fan, you're still paying attention. There were years growing up when my teams were not in the race and out of it for playoff time, but I still paid attention. I'm guessing the level of investment might drop, so hopefully they're still listening in. But yeah, you never know.
If you are still listening in, we love to hear from you, whichever market it is. And by all means, if it's one of those four markets that do not make the playoffs or did not make the playoffs this time around, happy to hear from you. Leave a comment on the YouTube channel, send an email, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. And hey, while you're there, don't forget to subscribe, give us a like, leave a review, tell a friend, because the larger the audience, the longer Dan and I keep doing this. That is Dan Mahar over there. You'll find him on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I am at Farwell_OHL. Mike Farwell is the name. Dan, we touched on this last week, and I think it's worth diving into a little bit further. The NHL beginning work on a new CBA, and we know that part of this collective bargaining agreement in the National Hockey League is going to have some discussion around the NCAA rule change that we've talked so much about on this podcast this season. Let me start this way, if I can, and a quote from Bill Daly in the NHL league offices. We'll both evaluate what the exclusive negotiating rights windows currently provide and how they attach to different players' situations that we haven't contemplated or anticipated before. That's just a process. There are existing rules currently, and you can apply them to the players. Whether that's the right result or the perfect result, I would say it probably isn't, so they should probably be reevaluated on some basis. I think the Players Association is prepared to do that, and I think we are prepared to do that. That, of course, has all got to do with the negotiating window after a player is drafted. If they're coming out of the NCAA, that's a longer window. If they're coming out of the CHL, it's a shorter window. What do you make, Dan, of the impact that this new NHL CBA is going to have on the CHL and specifically the OHL?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of ways it could impact the OHL, both positively and negatively. The one you just referred to about the negotiation window, so the teams holding the rights out of the CHL for 2 years, out of the NCAA for 4. There's long been a belief amongst NHL teams in various groups that should be evened out. So whether that both become 3, both become 4, whatever the case may be, I think that is beneficial to the CHL, obviously. I heard some NHL execs speaking before this season, and they said, I remember one of them anonymously quoted saying that if it was basically a tie in their rankings between two players, they're obviously going with the NCAA player because they have longer to sign him, longer to evaluate him before deciding to sign him, to hold his rights. So obviously advantage NCAA on that one. So evening this out will just benefit the CHL. Players might just one more reason to report to the CHL. There's a number of other things they're discussing. Who knows how those will shake down? I think the NHL is a little bit uneasy about rights transferring left and right amongst various leagues and various teams. So we'll see how they iron that one out. But I think just on that one we spoke about, Mike, that's a positive for the CHL, I would think.
I'm a little bit worried that one of the things that will come out of all of this as the dust begins to settle is more control for the NHL over 19-year-old players. And you and I have touched on this before, and I think that is something that the CHL has to be really cautious around because those 19-year-old players, as we know, are the players that help teams win championships in this league.
Yeah, it's one of those things. If you think about, Mike, I would argue that the impact to the NHL is minimal around how we govern 19-year-olds. The impact to the CHL is enormous if there's changes to how we govern 19-year-olds. So I think everyone has to consider the weight of that decision. Yeah, it's a nice to have maybe for an NHL team to be able to take their top one or two 19-year-olds and decide if they want to give them a run in the AHL. That's a nice to have. We've talked at length, Mike. It's certainly not going to ruin them to put them back in the OHL. So that's a minor detail. It would be devastating to the junior leagues if they lost those players. Like you said, they're the major draws in this league. They elevate the level. They're who fans come to see for the most part. So I'm hoping they get that one right. I'm hoping it's not a power play where every team wants to be able to place every player in the or every first round pick or second round pick in the AHL for the season. Like we talked about, maybe there's a window you can get up to 10 or 20 games, or maybe it's just, just top 10 picks or something, or players who have played a minimum of 4 years in the league, like those kind of things. But I'm hoping there's a balance here and they get it right because, like I said, that decision impacts the junior league much more significantly than the NHL.
One of the things I find really interesting about all of this, Dan, is when we first started talking about this upcoming reopening of the CBA negotiations, the relationship between the CHL and the NHL, the word from the National Hockey League, and this comes out of the Four Nations face-off when we first started talking about it, there is an appetite for working together more closely. The NHL would help guide the CHL's expansion, and at the same time, it was saying the NHL was, let's not be too hasty in that expansion, CHL. Don't don't rush into this thing and we'll help you in the process moving forward. And I think the WHL just said, hold my beer. And Penticton comes into the dub for this coming season, 25-26, and sounds like Chilliwack will join for 26-27. So the dub ain't waiting for you, National Hockey League.
Yeah, I was interested to see how the NHL folks might react to that. My hunch is that the Penticton decision was a little bit too far down the road by the time the NHL kind of said, "Whoa, whoa, hold your horses on expansion." That one might have been more directed towards the OHL and them acquiring potentially a couple USHL franchises. I think it was well known for a while now that the Penticton sale was going to happen. It was well down the road. The Chilliwack thing's interesting. Maybe the same thing. Maybe it's further down the road. But as someone, I know you've spent time out there, Mike. I've spent time in Chilliwack as well, and it makes sense as a market. Just about an hour outside of Vancouver, right along the Trans Canada, big market. Sardis on one side of the highway. I mean, it's got a history. So I think there's some markets there that those leagues are certainly interested in tapping. So we'll see how serious the NHL is about this hold your horses on expansion thing. Obviously, they'd like to have some say before things get too far down the road and the horses have left the barn. So I think that was more a missive towards the OHL on their, shall we call it, territorial interests. Is that what Donald Trump uses? Is that the term? So
I think that's a good use of language in this case. Yes, let's get into Ohio a little bit. Let's expand that footprint in Michigan, should, of course, Youngstown and Muskegon join the Ontario Hockey League. The bottom line is next year, the dub becomes a 21 team league, and the year after sounds like 22. Pardon me, 23 and then 24 because there are 22 already. 18 in the Q, 20 in the O. So the dub next year is 23 teams, probably 24 the year after, by which time we might also expect the Ontario Hockey League to reach at least 22 teams when Muskegon and Youngstown join. And I can't help but wonder, Dan, if that 24 number that the dub would become by 26-27 isn't the kind of number that maybe the Ontario Hockey League is looking at as a comfortable landing place when it expands.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's certainly some argument for that, right? It's a nice even number. It's a good, healthy number of franchises. I think we talked a little bit before, though, about ambition can be a tricky thing because if you think too far beyond 24, you can draw some problems with expanding too quickly, going into markets that aren't quite ready, haven't ironed out all the details. Because let's face it, there are still a couple markets, current markets, that are still struggling in some regard to maintain viability in this league. So yeah, I think you're right about that number. 24 is kind of a reasonable target to achieve, but I would side with the NHL if they're in the background and saying, "Well, let's not look at 28 to 30 here just yet. Let's be a little cautious." So, who knows what's being said behind the scenes, but 24 seems like a reasonable upper end target at best.
One of the things we love most about doing this podcast is the feedback and interaction we get with you. And Dan, you mentioned something on last week's Wraparound that really got people talking. There were folks coming into media rooms that I was in over the past week saying, did Troy Mann really say that to Dave Cameron when Kingston and Ottawa kind of got at things and the coaches kind of got into things towards the end of a Frontenac's 67s game? And indeed, as you followed the reporting from Don Brennan in the Ottawa Citizen, there were words exchanged between Troy Mann and Dave Cameron, and the league has come down and said, you ought not do that, and some fines have been levied.
Yeah, and first and foremost, I should have credited Don Brennan for that little story, a quick hit story in the wraparound last week. Should have sourced it. It was Don Brennan, the Ottawa Citizen. Terrific reporting by him, and just yeah, an all around interesting exchange. And I think really inside hockey people are probably sitting back and saying, "Yeah, that's nothing. I've heard that 100 times over in my career. So like this happens all the time. What's the big deal?" But people that are kind of used to sitting in the stands or haven't heard of this law, they're like, "Whoa, that was a cheap shot." But anyway, I just find it's kind of amusing the interactions, and who knows what the follow up has been. But the fact that the league has fined these gentlemen validates the story. Obviously, just a little bit of, I guess, lightheartedness. Although I'm not sure if you're on the Ottawa side, you took that too lightheartedly in the week when you're being eliminated. But these things happen, Mike.
Troy Mann and the Kingston Frontenacs get the heftier of the fines at $3,500. Dave Cameron, the Ottawa 67s, $2,500. What I find most interesting about this, Dan, is we've been doing this podcast for a number of years. We've been following the league, obviously, for even longer. These sorts of things are not the sorts of things you hear about as much anymore. And by these sorts of things, I mean the coaches really demonstrating some animosity towards one another. And this is the second time this season, right? We had Chris Millette and Rob Wilson in Erie. Millette, the coach of the Otters, Wilson, the coach of the Petes. And that was a little bit more of a physical altercation that spilled off the ice, and maybe there were heated exchanges. And I do believe one of the assistant coaches had their fist cocked. Not that they were that close to somebody, but there was more of a physical tone to that, I'll just say. In this case, it's the verbal altercation, the high level chirping, if you will, back and forth between the benches. I just think this goes to show, though, the magnitude of the games in this league and the importance. Like, these coaches are wearing every win and every loss right now.
Yeah, I think when fans just casually show up and sit in the stands, they don't realize how much stress is built up in there's a lot on the line. The tension is there. Things happen on and off the ice that really wind people up. And then, so like you said, a lot of these coaches are ready to boil over, especially with the enormity of the situation at the end of the season. But the other aspect too that sometimes we forget is these coaches are coaching teenage hockey players, and almost every one of these altercations stems from one of these coaches feeling like the other side is targeting one of their teenage players. It's almost like a dad instinct that kicks in, right? And I'm not defending some of the comments or the actions or the fighting or whatnot, but you can appreciate that when you feel like one of your uh, adopted kids here is being targeted in some way, especially by another coach or adult, some things might go off. So that's kind of at the root of all these things. They boil over quickly. I'm sure these guys, laugh over at the golf course in the summer or whatnot. But I chalk it up to that dad instinct, Mike.
The Ontario Hockey League has handed out its end of season awards, end of regular season, but it's a little bit of a misnomer, I would say, to call these awards. We know who the leading scorer was. We know the top scoring right winger. We know which team won the regular season Hamilton Spectator Trophy, the division winners, etc. There are more awards to be handed out. And since this is the kind of episode where Dan and I stick our necks out, we'll make some playoff predictions a little bit later on. We thought, why not just speculate a little bit on a couple of the bigger awards that will be handed out in the league in the not too distant future, those being Coach of the Year and Most Outstanding Player. Let's start, Dan, with Coach. If you were given the deciding vote on Coach of the Year in the Ontario Hockey League, who would you give it to?
Mike, this one was super tough for me because I had two guys that were head and shoulders, in my opinion, above the pack. So I really struggled to see which one I was going to go with. But I have to give this one to Greg Walters in Windsor, Mike. And just the turnaround that team experienced. And I know he had a lot of talent at his disposal coming in this year. But when you go from 10 to 2 in the standings and go up to the towards the 100-point barrier and just had them going all in every night, I had to give the slightest of edge to Mr. Walters, Mike.
Over.
Well, I didn't want to steal your thunder, but it was over UC Hocus and Kitchener, and almost for the same reasons. And I almost leaned towards a Hocus for my belief that he had a little bit less to work with, maybe going into the season. And I had Kitchener in eighth. And when I look at where I predicted the team to finish versus where they did finish, that was a strong case for a Hocus to be my guy. I think those two were top of the pack for sure. Slight edge to Walters for me.
It's interesting. So I think Walters belongs in the conversation too, obviously, for the reasons you just mentioned. What I'm curious about, and I'm not saying this is right, I'm just saying I recognize that there's a political aspect to virtually everything. Do you think the league really can or would do that? Give the Coach of the Year award to Greg Walters when he is just coming off the year during which he was suspended for half of it.
And, it's a really fair point, and I kind of answered that question based on who my selection would likely be if I had to vote. Whether or not the league takes that into account is a different question, and you may be absolutely right. And I'll just go on record as saying, for me, it was a virtual tie, and if they were to hand it to UC Hocus, I don't think anyone could possibly argue with that choice. With the system he's instilled in Kitchener and just the consistency that that team has brought forth, the third period comebacks, everything about that team this year screams coach of the year. But yeah, it's an interesting point whether or not the league would hold that against Walters.
Yeah, and you would hope that doesn't come into play. I just think that, as I said, it seems everything's political these days. There's a lot of politicking going on in the sport of hockey and elsewhere, but we're focusing on hockey. It would be interesting, but not that Greg Walters would be undeserving. He's certainly in the mix of coaches I look at. I think the aforementioned Troy Mann, his interactions with Dave Cameron notwithstanding, is a pretty worthwhile candidate to at least consider. Again, because I'm not sure that anybody expected Kingston to finish where they finished going into the final weekend with a chance to win the Eastern Conference. I think you have to give a considerable amount of credit to Mann in that regard. I think Dale Hunter probably gets overlooked because the teams he has are almost always so good. He's a two-time winner from the past. In this case, maybe I would uh, not vote for Dale Hunter because that London team is so stacked, but you got to remember, and we talked about it at the beginning of the season, I love the pursuit of excellence. And coming into a year where you know that your team is expected to win it all, and you go on and have the second best season in franchise history and putting up 100 plus points, it's really impressive stuff. But I don't think Dale would get the nod because the team is so well built, which brings me to Jay McKee. I think there's, and I know, show me a 71 goal scorer, Nick Lardis. I'll show you a great coach in Jay McKee. But boy, oh boy, this guy I think has been overlooked before personally. And when you look at what Brantford did this year, going into that weekend, needing the win in the final weekend over Kingston to secure first place in the Eastern Conference, the second half that the Bulldogs had was terrific stuff. And I think you got to hand it to Jay McHugh, who's working with a different crew behind the bench, right? He and his former colleague from Kitchener when they were together, Andreas Carlson, leaves and goes to the NHL. They were kind of like Batman and Robin. So Jay McKee gets it done with another crew. And take nothing away from Vince Lays and Ryan Kuwabara. They're a great crew, but I think McKee deserves a ton of credit there. I do ultimately land, though, bias notwithstanding, on UC Ahokas in this regard. Again, Kitchener Rangers coming into the season, this was supposed to be a rebuild. After a rebuild last year, the Rangers graduate or trade away more than 300 points and about 125 goals. And they have an incredible season during which they never lost 3 games in a row in regulation. Yes, there were some key additions through the season, Jack Pridham probably chief among them, but you take a coach that can incorporate guys as they're coming into the lineup, the changing faces, the changing dynamics. You continue to keep that culture front and center. To me, again, my bias notwithstanding, UC Ahokas is the coach of the year in the OHL.
Yeah, well, and I can't argue with that. And your McKee point, McKee and Mann were third and fourth on my list, and I don't know that I've seen it. We talk about this league being a developmental league for coaches as well. I'm not sure I've seen a coach grow more than Jay McKee in his tenure. Absolutely, one of the top notch ones now, has gotten much better over the years. But one little caveat to this whole discussion, Mike, can we call it coaching staff of the year, please?
Sure.
All right. Just because I think you hit the nail on the head when you referenced Andreas Carlson and the various other ones, but you know in Kitchener how much Jeff Krzakos and Brad Flynn have meant to that team. I think all of these awards are really the staffs because they put in all the work on the special teams. They put in a lot of work on various schemes. So to me, it's a reflection of the staff as much as the head guy.
So Dan goes Greg Walters. I go UC Ahokas. We've both got guys like Mann and McKee, maybe even Dale Hunter in the mix. If it's none of those five, Dan and I might stop podcasting. Okay. We'll just leave it at that. I'm not going to promise that because we like doing this just in case they surprise us. But okay, moving from one award to another. And this one I find interesting, and we'll get into it if we have the conversation. But in the OHL, they call it most outstanding player. So I'll let you start on this one, Dan. Were you to cast the deciding vote today, who is your most outstanding player?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to shock you on this one, Mike, but I think in many of the same ways Dale Hunter gets somewhat overlooked as a coach because of how good his roster is. Some people tend to overlook Michael Misa just because of his pedigree, his background, how good he's supposed to be. But for me, Mike, it has to be Michael Misa this year. 134 points, just a phenomenal year. The streaks he went on, scoring in almost every game, power play, special, like he's just does everything, does it every night. No one can stop him, even though that team unloaded some players, and he was an obvious target for the shutdown lines. Just brought it from day one to the end of the season, Mike. And I know there's some candidates in this category as well, but how could I not give it to Michael Misa?
I think it's a fair point. And yes, there are some candidates in this category. I wanted to, and again, here's my bias, but boy, oh boy, getting to watch this guy day in and day out, and just so happy for him to be able to do what he did this year because COVID impacted his OHL career. An injury derailed the season where he was supposed to take over as the starter. He never got to show himself. Jackson Parsons comes through with a season for the ages in goal for the Kitchener Rangers. But I won't give it to Jackson Parsons because in the OHL, it's most outstanding player, not most valuable player. When it's the MVP, we get into the conversation of who is most valuable to their team. And that, I think, really casts a wider net. But I would certainly argue that most valuable to their team, tough to find somebody more valuable to their team than Jackson Parsons. In the case of most outstanding, and I love the case you built for Michael Misa, but I'm going to build the same case for Nick Lardis in Brantford because, I mean, listen, you want to talk about scoring almost every game, the tear that he went on, the 17 multi-point games. I forget how many hat tricks. I should have looked it up, but 71 goals. So yes, Michael Misa, 134 points, truly outstanding. And I'm not going to be upset if Misa gets this award when the OHL announces it. But one of only two handfuls of guys in league history to eclipse the 70 goal mark. That's pretty damn outstanding from where I'm sitting. So I'll give the nod to Nick Lardis on most outstanding player.
Well, I kind of laughed for two reasons, Mike. Two reasons. One, he was my second choice. Two, I if you had asked me to predict your choice, I would have known it was your boy Nick Lardis. And yeah, so all those everything you just said is absolutely valid. I think for me, having Patrick Thomas and Jake O'Brien with him, maybe a little bit more to work with than Misa. That was one of my leanings. But yeah, you certainly can't argue with a 71 goal choice for sure.
All right. We've got one final wraparound for this regular season as we head into the playoffs. One final prospect of the week. And yes, indeed, our playoff predictions. All of that still to come on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. This NHL season has been as predictable as a puck rolling on its edge. No one knows where it's going, but that just means there's time for your favorite team to figure things out. And games left for you to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. It is super easy for first-timers to get started. Try betting on something simple, like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. And if you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, Dan Mahar, one final time, because we can't do this during the playoffs, right? Only 16 teams left, and we'll focus on playoff action as it's coming up. But we like to do a little look around the entire Ontario Hockey League with our weekly wraparound, and you, sir, are on Western Conference duty this week.
Yeah, so I'm going to kick it off in Erie, and Mike, you know how much I love these stories, but 6'6" U18 draft pick Oliver Phillips played 47 games for the Erie Otters this year. Final game of the season, pots his first goal, first OHL goal, and I love those stories. And if he's telling his kids this story down the road, he can tell them that it was a game-winning goal against the London Knights.
Absolutely phenomenal. I love those stories too, and there's a similar one coming up a little bit later on in my Eastern Conference side of the wraparound. But that's later. Right now, it's Barrie, where I will start. And after setting a new franchise record for goals in a season by a defenseman, Kayshawn Aitchison is now the Colts' leading goal scorer for the year. Aitchison scored his 26th of the season last week, which is one better than forward Riley Patterson. Also, goaltender Ben Hrebeck was named Barrie's most improved player this season as voted by the Colts coaching staff.
Congrats to both of them.
You bet.
Moving on to Flint. So one thing to keep an eye on as we head into the playoffs here is a lot of teams lean on their older players in the playoffs, and the Flint Firebirds unfortunately have lost Evan Conyon and Nolan Collins, two overage players, for the season, most likely, leaving Blake Smith as the only overage player going to be on that roster to start the playoffs. So heavy load for Mr. Smith to carry. Unfortunate for the Firebirds, especially Collins on the back end, a huge loss.
Yeah, tough stretch down or tough run down the stretch for Flint too. It took them forever to finally wrap up that sixth playoff spot in the West.
Yeah.
All right, in Brampton for me, and the Steelheads defense does not rest. Connor Smith picked up his first career hat trick as part of a career-high 5-point night in a 6-1 win over the Petes. And defenseman Stevie Leskovar, who just so happens to be a Cambridge native right in the same community where Dan and I live, Leskovar has signed his entry-level contract with the Minnesota Wild. Both Smith and Leskovar, coincidentally, were both drafted into the Ontario Hockey League by the Peterborough Petes.
Two large defenders right there.
You betcha.
All right, Mike. It's sort of an epitaph to Guelph here. First, a really positive career first. Goaltender Colin Ellsworth, first OHL shutout on the final day of the season against the Kitchener Rangers. The first time the Rangers were shut out this year, so congratulations to Colin. And just a farewell to overagers Ryan McGuire, Max Nemesnikov, and Jake Carabella, all pros in that Guelph roster, and we wish them the best as their career sunsets here.
How about Ryan McGuire's final game? We know he plays the game with some jam, and he ends up with a 2-5-10 with about 10 minutes to go in the third period. So he sits in the penalty box to finish his OHL career.
And against Mr. Andrew McNeil, too. What is it about him fighting overagers towards the end of the season here? I don't know.
What is it about overagers fighting him? I don't know.
That's a better question.
All right, in Brantford, and this is where I tie it back into what you were saying earlier, Dan, the story that you love. The first career goal from Nico Krimpatic, the first
Mhm.
shutout as a Bulldog for Ryerson Leanders, and an East Division and Eastern Conference championship for Brantford. That's a lot of good to come from one 4-0 win over Kingston. And then Krimpatek added a second goal the following night to finish the regular season with 3 points, 2 goals, and an assist, all of them coming in the Bulldogs' final 6 games.
It's funny how once you get a taste, it just starts flowing, eh?
That's
Yeah.
exactly what I was thinking. Bingo.
Yeah, so moving to the Kitchener Rangers. So this year hit the 100 point mark for just the fourth time in franchise history. I would have thought more with all some of those great teams they've had in the past. And this certainly I did not have on my bingo card at the start of the year. I did not think they had the horses this year. So that's a huge credit to those kids and to that coaching staff. But also just one more first there, Mike. It's always a great thing to see a first OHL game, and yesterday we saw one for Avery Ansis, who got in his first OHL career game of many, I'm sure.
Yeah, he's been playing with the Listowel Cyclones in the GOJ, the GOJHL, and we are sure he will be a contributing member of the Rangers moving forward for sure. Okay, in Kingston, the Fronts have themselves a pair of 90-point players. Both Jacob Battaglia and Tuomas Urinen reached that milestone this year. The last time Kingston had a couple of 90-point guys was 2021-2022 when Lucas Edmonds and a guy named Shane Wright each topped 90 points that season.
Wow. Yes. Recent history.
Yes, sir.
All right. Looking at London, if you want to wonder how a team is that good, here's a couple stats for you. So, no player had more than 30 goals, Landon Sim. 8 had more than 20. So, a lot of balance in that scoring. And you can even throw in a ninth if we recognize that Van Gorp had 19, which is pretty darn close. So, 9 players between 19 and 30 goals. But if you also want to know how they're so good, look at who had the top power play in the league, London. Who had the top penalty kill in the league, London. When you're number one in both special teams, you're probably a contender.
You know, there was a time that the mark was 80-20. If your power play is operating at about 20% and your penalty kill at about 80, you're doing well. These days, it's closer to 30 on the power play and closer to 85 on the penalty kill. And that's where you find the Knights' numbers this year.
Yeah, 27.5 and 84.9. So there you go.
There you go. All right. In Niagara, as I continue here in the East, the Ice Dogs are about to embark on their first playoff run since 2019. However, they're doing it having won just 2 games since the beginning of February. Ouch. Ryan Rubrick, though, has been a season-long highlight. He leads Niagara with 41 goals and 87 points, and as a late birthday, Rubrick isn't eligible for the NHL draft until next year. So get ready for the 100-point season that is coming up, I promise.
There is some talent in that draft next year.
Yes, sir.
All right, and moving to Owen Sound. So I know we've heard an awful lot about this kid, Mike, but how can I not end the season with just mentioning that Pierce Bowie wins the rookie scoring title with 52 points in 63 games and settles that debate, because when you look at the list of rookies, a lot of nice players on that list, but the true 16-year-old at the top of it. So really impressive for a 16-year-old kid to win that title with all the competition from slightly older players. So great year by Bowie.
Love to see it. Get used to the name. Forget the M. It's silent, okay? Mbui. It's Bowie. And yeah, we'll all be saying it in the years ahead in the OHL for sure. In North Bay, head coach Ryan Houlihan said that the battalion controlled their own destiny with 9 games to go and 6 of them at home. Well, the troops responded. They picked up points in 4 of those 6 home games, and they claimed the final playoff spot in the East. That included a win over Oshawa and picking up a point in an overtime loss to Barrie. Inat Pazzi led the way with 6 goals in those final 9 games for North Bay.
Yeah, he had a great finish to the season. So
He sure did. And if I butchered your name, I'm sorry. I did my best on that.
you did well. You did well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Looking at Saginaw, Mike, what a weird team. And I know we've mentioned these players a lot through the wraparounds over the years, but it is an anomaly when you find a team, not a runaway first place team, just a team in the middle of the pack that had the league scoring champion and the league defensive scoring leader. But it wasn't just that Michael Misa and Zane Prek won those 2 categories. It was by how much they won them. Michael Misa was 10 points up on the next highest player in the league for the scoring title, and Zane Prek was 16 points ahead of the next highest scoring defender. So those are 2 really big weapons they're going to roll into the playoffs. So beware of those those dangerous spirit.
I tell you, I don't discount the defending champs until they've been discounted. You know what I'm saying?
100%.
Absolutely. Okay, to Oshawa, where it was a 4-point week that moved Luca Morelli into second place all time in scoring among Gen's defensemen. Morelli's 170 points now, two better than Norm Schmidt, who played for the Gens back in the early 1980s. Now, Oshawa was a little wobbly down the stretch. They needed a shootout to stop the Sioux, and they dropped games to Ottawa and North Bay in their final 6 contests.
And that's a good segue into my next stop, Mike, which is Sarnia. And, a bittersweet but appropriate ending to their wraparound this year. So they head into the Sioux for the final game of the year, needing a win to force a tiebreak for the playoff spot against a Sioux team that was resting Brady Martin and Chase Reed, amongst others. Seems fair enough, right? Get the opening goal looking good. Surrendered 5 unanswered to that depleted Sioux squad to go home early, which kind of typifies how things went for Sarnia, particularly in the last month or so. Things just slid downhill and they couldn't right the ship in Sarnia this year.
We had 2 chances for a play-in tiebreaker game this year, Dan. We haven't had one since '02 in the league. Sarnia, Owen Sound could have been playing for one in the West, and North Bay, Ottawa in the East, but we were denied once again.
It looked like it was going to be a lock for one and then just evaporated.
Yeah, for sure. All right, to the nation's capital. In Ottawa, Luca Pinelli, now an all-time 67. Pinelli scored his 128th career goal on the weekend. That moves him into a tie for 10th most all-time by an Ottawa 67's skater. Pinelli is a Columbus Blue Jackets prospect, if you're keeping track of that. And head coach Dave Cameron picked up his 500th career win. I wonder if Troy Mann sent him a congratulatory text. You knew
Just
that was
thinking
coming,
it.
Mahar.
Just thinking it. All right. Well, in the category of low blows, like you're just talking about, going to
Hey,
Sioux, or
yeah.
going to Sioux, and you want to talk about the opposite Sarnia and Clutch. So here's what happened, Mike. I'm going to tell you what happened. Here's the inside story. The Sioux was looking like they were landing definitely in 9th place in the Western Conference. Looked like a lock. They were kind of down and out. They looked at Dan Mahar's preseason prediction, said he has us in 9th place in the West. He's going to nail it. So they go on a 5-game winning streak to end the season, get up to 7th, make the playoffs. 32-point improvement for Mignosa from 53 points to 85 this year. What a year he had, and Sioux came in clutch to get to the playoffs, Mike.
OHL Podcast Nation giving you a bit of a hard time, Dansky. I saw some of the comments on the YouTube page.
Oh, yeah.
I love it. I love it. Okay, in Peterborough, the Petes unfortunately ended the season the way they started it, which is on a losing streak. Peterborough dropping its final 6 games this year. On the bright side, the Petes will have the best odds in the draft lottery, so there's that. Also, head coach Rob Wilson was behind the bench for his 400th OHL game last week. He has just finished the first year of his 8-year contract extension. So Rob Wilson's still in for the long haul, another 7 seasons with the Petes.
Some of that consistency they look for.
You betcha.
All right. Well, last wraparound, last team of the year for me in the West, Mike, is the Windsor Spitfires. And, I look at these anomalous stats, and we talked again a lot about these two as well. But you look at the top of the scoring sheet, you see Liam Greentree and Ilya Protas. And between those two players, Mike, 243 points. Just unbelievable. If the top of your lineup puts up that kind of production, I don't care who the rest of the skaters are, you're going to be good. And the rest of the skaters are pretty good. So look out for Windsor. That was 46 points, Mike, above the next highest Spitfire. Those two were just running away with it.
That's funny. 243 points between those two guys, but that's nothing compared to Ryland Singh. There was a misprint in our media kit in Guelph on Sunday. It showed Ryland Singh with 227 assists.
Wow. He must have had a good weekend.
He must have. I don't know where it came from, but that's what we got. All right, one final stop for me on the wraparound, and that is in Sudbury, where the Wolves finished the regular season by dropping 4 in a row, but they did rest some key starters before the playoffs once they were set. The big thing is that head coach Scott Barney only, quote, hopes the team is fully healthy, with Sudbury's first round opening Friday in Kingston. Coach Adelic and Quentin Musty among the players who did not play the final weekend of games for the Wolves. And by the way, Sudbury led the Eastern Conference in penalty minutes this year with 1,015. That was second in the league, only behind Saginaw's 1,049.
Familiar territory for Sudbury. They like to play that rugged style. So.
They do like to play that rugged style. We like it when they play that rugged style. You got to know you're up in northern Ontario when you go and play in the Nickel City. All right. We know this too, Dan, right? Only fools make predictions. Am I right or am I right?
Well, I know we do. We're fools, so that must
Bingo.
support that.
There are only two fools on this podcast. And yes, we will make our predictions. Plus, those are the playoff predictions. And your final prospects of the week still to come on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. Games 69 and beyond are finally here, Dan Mahar, which means the playoffs are about to begin, which means we can make our playoff predictions. I thought it might be fun just to take a quick look back. We'll start in the Eastern Conference, okay? When the season started, Dan Mahar, you had the Eastern Conference lining up this way: Oshawa, Brampton, Brantford, Barrie, Kingston, Ottawa, Sudbury, Niagara. So you had North Bay and Peterborough missing, and Peterborough missed. North Bay made it. We also know that Ottawa now missed. I had Brampton, Oshawa, Brantford, Barrie, Kingston, Ottawa, North Bay, Peterborough. Damn, Pete's let me down. I had Sudbury missing, and I had Niagara missing. So I was 0 for 2 on the teams missing the playoffs in the East. That's how we started this year. I think the key takeaway is those top 4 teams, and we talked about this at the beginning of the season. We felt as though they were interchangeable. We just didn't know which way they would land. They landed, by the way, Brantford, Barrie, Kingston, and then Oshawa.
Yeah, and in our defense, Mike, I will just say, let's not get too caught up on the slot we had him in. The point differentials were very tight, so I think we were pretty darn close on that, on the order, if you really think about it. So
I think that's fair. That's
yeah,
fair. Okay.
yeah.
So if we're going to stick with the East in the playoff predictions, you've got the 1-8 Brantford hosts North Bay. What do you think?
You know what? This one intrigues me more than it probably should, because I was really impressed with how North Bay competed down the stretch. I loved what they brought every night. They were in games. They had some contributions from newer players. So I've got North Bay. It's going to sound crazy that all this praise I'm giving them one game, but I have Brantford winning this in 5. So,
I have the same thing, and for the same reason. I like North Bay down the stretch. I talked about it in the wraparound. They pick up points in 4 of those final 6 home games, so they won't be an easy out. They're putting money in the bank for the years ahead. This is a team that went to 3 straight East finals. They work their way, they claw their way back into the playoffs. I like that. The scrappiness will get them a game, but Brantford, I agree, wins it in 5. Okay, Barrie, the 2 seed against Niagara, the 7.
all right, this one, Mike, I would have probably gone differently had it not been for how awful Niagara was after the trade deadline. So I got to give this one to Barrie in 5, and it's purely because of just how poorly Niagara played. I think they're better than that. I think the series should be better than that. But my hunch, based on what I saw in the last 2 months, is giving this to Barrie in 5.
Yeah, I have a similar hunch, but I'm not even being as kind as you are. Sorry, Ice Dogs fans. I've got the Colts in a sweep. The Niagara Ice Dogs are just a team in disarray. I know sweeps are not easy, but I just can't see them getting their stuff together to make it a challenge for the Barrie Colts. Great draw for Barrie, quite frankly, but I've got the Colts in 4, which moves us to Kingston and Sudbury, the 3-6 matchup.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a great series. Probably the one that intrigues me the most in the East. I actually like a lot of what both teams bring to it. I just think that veteran lineup that Kingston has, and we talked about the coaching, they're kind of a complete balanced lineup, which is what you like to see in the playoffs. I've got Kingston in 6, Mike.
It's interesting. I love this matchup too. It's probably my favorite. Well, no, it's not my favorite. The next one's my favorite of the
Yeah.
first, I think, across the board. But Sudbury intrigues me, Dan. The team that went for it last year and ended up getting swept in the second round, works their way back into it. They keep Quentin Musty. They get through all of that. I really like what Scott Barney has done for this hockey club. I'm not sure the Colts have the Wolves have the goaltending they need. And I do like the veteran leadership that the Kingston Frontenacs traded for. I mentioned earlier, Troy Mann could be in the conversation as one of the candidates for Coach of the Year. I'm going to give this one to the Fronts as well, but I think it's going to take 7.
Very well could.
Very
Yeah.
well could. How about this one, though, now? The big one, I think everybody is looking forward to this one except fans of the Oshawa Generals. They are the 4 seed. They take on the 5th seeded Brampton Steelheads. What do you make of this one, Dan Mahar?
Well, these were my 1-2 seeds in my predictions. So having them meet in the first round is less than ideal, but it is intriguing. I know this is going to be an absolute war. I think the way Brampton was playing down the stretch gives lots of reason to think they could pull it off. I still, Mike, I'm giving this one. It's got to go 7 just because of how good these two teams are, but I'm giving it to Oshawa in 7. I just like the balance a tiny bit more. I love the pickup of Andrew Gibson. I think they've rounded out their lineup at the trade deadline just enough to squeak by.
I also had Brampton Oshawa 1-2. And so, as we've talked about, since the East loaded up, there's going to be a really good team going home in the first round. And it's going to be one of these two, obviously. I'm with you on what you just said. And the balance, the structure, like the build, the way the Oshawa Generals are built
Yeah,
screams championship to me.
yeah,
I honestly, I just don't love the way they've been playing, but I
yeah.
kinda like a lot the way that the Brampton Steelheads have been playing. They are one of the hottest teams in the final quarter of the season, 13-2-2 over their final 17 games here, Dan. I I like Ivan Kovic in goal if he can, at his age, keep it together and stick with this team. They've got offense to burn. I am taking the Brampton Steelheads in a wee bit of an upset here in 6 games.
Well, we had to differ on one of them, Mike. So,
Exactly.
I don't think it's going to be surprising either way, but it's going to be one to watch for sure.
No question about that. Okay, let's move over to the Western Conference, the 1-8 Owen Sound. Congratulations on earning your way into the playoffs and then scoreboard watching to see if Sarnia would force you into a play-in game. For your efforts, you get rewarded with a first round date with the London Knights.
Yeah, and here's the one sweep I've got, Mike, and it's no disrespect to Owen Sound. Love what they did down the stretch. Who can Carter George and Kaprowski, the goaltending tandem was terrific down the stretch, and we talked about some of their future talent. I just think London's got too much structure, come at you in waves, too much playoff pedigree. I think this one goes in 4, Mike.
On paper, I thought the same thing, and then I thought, wait a minute. There's a guy named Carter George that made 50 saves against the Kitchener Rangers. He had another 50 save performance or 50 shots against not too long after. I think Carter George might be good for a game for the Owen Sound attack here. They are definitely overmatched. The Knights will win, but I've got the Knights in 5 in this one,
Fair enough.
which
Yeah.
brings us to Windsor and Sault Ste. Marie. What do you think there?
All right. Well, I'm trying to make it up to Sue here and show them a little more respect than I did in the preseason preseason predictions. I just loved what they did down the stretch with that. I thought they came together. I thought the addition midseason of Chase Reed has changed the look of that team as they get healthy and start to get some of that structure and speed back in their game. I still think they're going to lose because Windsor is that powerful, but I'm giving it 6 games for the Spitfires to get past Sue.
I am in the exact same boat for basically the exact reason. You got to love the way the Greyhounds finished the season, right? They much like in North Bay when Ryan Oulahan's like we control our own destiny. The Sioux just basically went out and said they're one of 3 teams in the mix for the final 2 playoff spots, and they're like we're going to take control of this, and boom, they reel off 5 straight wins, including the final win albeit against Sarnia. No disrespect, Sarnia, but while they're resting regulars. Anyway, I like the way they play. It's never easy going up to the Sioux. So, yes, I also have Windsor winning because they're a big, heavy championship caliber team, but I think it's going to take them 6 games. So we agree on that, which probably bodes well for the team that faces Windsor in the second round because it's a long trip up there to the Sioux and they get worn down a little bit. Okay, the 3-6 matchup in the West, Dan, is Kitchener taking on the Flint Firebirds.
I actually expect this series to be extremely tight, Mike. I don't expect a lot of big score games. I think we're going to see a lot of 3-2s, 4-2s, maybe a 5-3 at best. But I really like some of what Flint did here. Sam McHugh's been a heck of an addition. I think they're a little thin, especially with the injuries we talked about in the wraparound. So I think Kitchener is just too good and too structured this year, but it's going to be tighter than people think. I'm going with Kitchener in 6.
It's funny. I those injuries you mentioned in the wraparound, Dan, are one of the biggest factors as far as I'm concerned. I love Sam McHugh as well and what he's meant to Flint since getting there. I like Nathan Day in goal. They're really solid there. Defensively, strong team. They've got a guy by the name of Connor Clattenburg who will make your life miserable for every minute that he's on the ice. And I just want to add this. I have been waiting since Flint came into the league for a playoff series at the Dort. There's just something about that arena that I love. I want to hear it in the playoffs. So I'm looking forward to that. The thing with this for me, I'm going 6 games as well. I wonder about the Kitchener Rangers killer instinct. I have seen this team play so well all season long. I think they could win in 4 or 5. It just depends on where that killer instinct sits, and we'll find out. But I'm going to go also with Kitchener in 6. So we are in agreement with the number of games on the last 2 series. Windsor Sioux, we've got Windsor in 6. Kitchener Flint, we've got Kitchener in 6, which brings us to the 4-5 matchup. The battle of 2 of the U.S.-based teams, Saginaw, Michigan, taking on Erie, PA. Who do you like, Dan?
Yeah, well, not surprisingly, Mike, I found the 4-5 matches in both conferences the toughest ones to pick. This one obviously could go either way. I like both teams a lot. Preseason, I had them both, I think 3-4 in the West. So it was tough for me. I just think because of that top of lineup dynamism that Saginaw has, I think it's going to be enough to outgun those Erie Otters. Erie's been inconsistent this year. They've never really righted the ship for any length of time. So over a 7-game series, I think unless they find a solution for those big guns on Saginaw, I've got Saginaw in 7.
Saginaw in 7.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I also feel Saginaw is going to win. I'm with you on the point you make about that inconsistency from Erie and preseason. This is a different ball game. Heck, preseason, I didn't go over this for the West, and I'm sorry about that. Let me flip my page here. In the West, I had London, Flint, Erie. Erie was going to be 3rd. Guelph, Saginaw, Kitchener in 6th, Sioux, and Owen Sound. So I had Sarnia missing, which happened, and Windsor missing, which definitely did not. Craig Walters, don't get mad at me. We already named you Coach of the Year on this episode. Dan, you had London, Saginaw, Erie, Windsor, Flint, Sarnia, Guelph, Kitchener, and then you had the Sioux and Owen Sound missing. Tisk, tisk. Like me in the East, both the Sioux and Owen Sound make it. So I had Erie running 2nd in the Midwest Division. Didn't happen. There's just something, and then the coaching change, and they haven't really been able to right the ship. I don't think there'll be an easy out per se. These will be close games. Saginaw's going to have to earn them, but I've got the Spirit in 5 in this one. Champions coming in to take care of you.
Would it, everything you said is valid, but would it impact your prediction at all if I told you Matt Schaefer steps back into the Erie lineup?
Trust me, I'm anticipating that
Yeah.
happening. I love the kid. I love the kid to death. After the length of time he's been away, and I just think there's too much firepower still on the Saginaw side. So we shall see, but it'll make for a good series.
No, that's fair. And I would love to see him back and kind of rounding into form quickly because that is a kid that can change a series.
No question about it. So all of that, 8 series, we've only got 1 that we differ on. I'm going out there on the limb and saying to the Oshawa Generals, the team that I think is built for a championship in the East, that they'll get knocked out in the first round by those upstart Brampton Steelheads.
Yeah, what a prize. Playoff season and your first round matchup is the Brampton Steelheads, who had so many injuries in the first half of the year that they weren't themselves. Then by the time everyone gets healthy, there's this wagon coming at you. So
It's going to be fun. It always is. That's for sure. One thing we have left to do, and it'll be the last time we do this for this season on the OHL podcast as well, and that is our weekly prospects. We each pick one that caught our eyes. Dan, who caught yours?
we're going to title this episode "Dan Sucks Up to the Sioux." For my last prospect of the week, making amends with the Greyhounds. Just love Travis Hayes. Is a guy that I've always liked. His speed game, his skill game. Finishes the year in a game that Sarnia needed to win. They probably don't want to hear this. Went out and got a goal, 2 assists. I love his potential to also impact a playoff series. So Travis Hayes is my guy, Mike.
If this is an episode entitled Dan Sucks Up to the Sioux, we can subtitle it Farwell Sucks Up to the East, because I am I'm going with co-prospects of the week, Dan. It's never been done before, I don't think. I'm breaking new ground here. How do you feel about this?
I'm okay with breaking it because Lord knows I'm going to set my own rules at some point. So go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to close out prospects of the week because I just couldn't decide between these two guys, and one I mentioned very recently, so that's why I wasn't sure. But I'm going to give a nod to Porter Martone, who's doing what he's supposed to be doing, and that's finishing the season with 7 goals and 2 assists in the final 6 games as Brampton comes into the playoffs hot. Like, look out, Oshawa, because this Steelheads team is swimming in the right direction. Now, the other guy is with a team that's less hot. I called them wobbly down the stretch, but Owen Griffin capped the season with his first career hat trick. That's his 4th multi-goal game of the season, and all of those multi-goal games came in the second half. I love a lot of things about this young man's game. So I am co-prospecting this week Porter Martone and Owen Griffin.
And that's your second Owen Griffin in a month. So that's actually that's impressive. And I think when you look at some of the stats and the prospects in the last week or two, there's going to be a few out there listening to this pod saying, "What the heck did I have to do to get the prospect of the week?" Well, calm down, Porter. Calm down, Michael. I know what you did. It's just we've picked you so many times. Like, share the wealth here. That's all. That's all.
And that's why I shared it with Porter Martone this week. I'm like, Owen Griffin again, really? But I got to give him a nod just because he closed out with a hat trick, even if the third one was an empty netter. Doesn't matter. Hat trick to hat trick. Got his first career hat trick. So there you go.
Ally afraid he disagrees, but we'll leave that for another day. So.
Kids, look up the quote. We won't talk like that
Yeah.
on the OHL podcast anymore. All right. The playoffs are here. Keep in touch with us. Remember, leave a comment on the YouTube channel. Send us an email anytime, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Interact on X also. You'll find Dan at his name, Dan Mahar. I am at Farwell_OHL. And even if you are in Sarnia, Guelph, Ottawa, or Peterborough, and you're out of the playoffs, you're welcome right here with us on the OHL podcast.